March 9th, 1945. Marana Islands, Pacific Ocean. Dusk settles over Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. Along newly carved airstrips on captured Japanese ground, crews swarm 325 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses for last-minute checks. The 21st Bomber Command, under Major General Curtis LeMay, is about to flip Pacific bombing doctrine on its head. Each bomber takes on cluster canisters jammed with 1,320 M69 incendiary bomblets, napalm charges designed to burn at 1,800 degrees F. The plan is both strategic and incendiary in every sense. Hit Tokyo's Shitamachi, roughly 750,000 residents living in wooden housing, crowded into about 12 square miles. At 17:35, the first B-29 leaves North Field on Guam. More follow, one by one, not in tight box formations. Many guns have been stripped off to double the incendiary payload. Pathfinders will paint the aim point with a giant burning X. Then the main force will release from only 5,000 to 7,000 feet, far below the aircraft's intended bombing altitude. What follows will reveal the ceiling of American firebomb tactics, and why Japanese defenses, despite resolve, could not blunt what became history's most consequential single air raid. The B-29 arrived in theater as World War II's most sophisticated bomber. Designers poured over 1.44 million engineering MANH hours into the program, part of a $3 billion spend, more than the Manhattan Project's $1.9 billion. Pressurized compartments, remote gun turrets, and 4 of the most powerful piston engines ever mounted on an aircraft made it a leap ahead. Production spanned the country: Boeing in Seattle, Rayon, and Wichita, Glenn L. Martin in Omaha, Bell in Marietta, Georgia. Each B-29 measured 99 feet long with a 141-foot wingspan, driven by 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclones at 2,200 horsepower each. Performance specs matched the mission: up to 20,000 pounds of bombs, a combat radius around 1,600, service ceilings to 150 feet, and peak speeds near 357 mph. By March 1945, combat units had received about 2,000 B-29s, with output racing toward 3,070. Boeing's Wichita plan alone averaged 4.2 Superfortresses per working day. The 20th Air Force, personally commanded by General Henry Hap Arnold, first staged B-29 operations from China in June 1944, then shifted to the Marana Islands on November 17, 1944. From the Marianas, the 21st Bomber Command ran 3 wings, 73rd and 313th on Saipan, 314th on Guam, able to put more than 300 bombers over a target at once, supported by specialized ground crews rotating around the clock. Japan's air defense posture lagged. By early 1945, the Army and Navy ran parallel chains of command with little coordination. The main night interceptor, the Nakajima J-1N Gecko Moonlight, was a recon platform-turned fighter, armed with twin 20mm Type 99s angled up 30 degrees and another pair angled down. In theory, it could rake bombers from off-axis. In practice, only 479 were built, and many were already gone. A second option, the Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu Dragon Killer, mounted a 37mm nose gun, plus oblique 20mm cannon, but production totaled only 1 Bo-71 since 1941. Without onboard radar, night interceptions depended on searchlights and the naked eye, tactics that broke down against fast, high-altitude intruders in the dark. The gun line wasn't stronger. Fewer than 500 heavy AA pieces defended metropolitan Tokyo. The Type 99 88mm Stur covered the upper reaches. The Type 98 20mm worked close in, but its effective ceiling was roughly 11,500 feet. The decisive weakness? No radar fire control. Optical rangefinders and acoustic locators struggled at night or in bad weather. Capacity told the rest of the story. The Marianas could launch hundreds of B-29s. The home islands could field perhaps 200 operational night fighters in March 1945. Fuel scarcity throttled training, leaving many pilots with minimal night hours. Aviation gasoline was so short that airframes were preserved strictly for last-ditch defense against an invasion. When Major General Curtis LeMay took over the 21st in January 1945, the bombing effort wasn't producing. High-altitude precision at 30,000 feet ran into the jet ream, 200-plus mph winds that scattered patterns miles off target, hauling heavy loads that high-punished R-3350s. Magnesium alloy components overheated. Heavy cloud cover, about 70% of the time, pushed crews onto crude radar and guesswork. Lame's answer was radical but data-driven. Strip everything except the tail guns. Load about 7 tons of incendiaries instead of the usual 3.5 tons of HE. Drop to 5,000, 9,000 feet to get under the jet ream. Cut engine stress and tighten CP. Strike at night to neutralize radarless fighters and undertrained night crews. Navigate singly by L-Oran signals and feed a continuous stream over several hours instead of stacked formations. Weather set the table for March 9th, 10. Clear skies and strong surface winds that would carry flame. The target logic was deliberate. Neighborhoods where cottage industry made aircraft parts, electrical gear, and precision components inside homes and micro workshops. Using OSS mapping and pre-war Japanese planning documents, analysts prioritized wards by infrastructure density. The chosen sector in northeast Tokyo, Asakusa, Honjo, and Fukagawa, was intensely packed, largely wooden, and working class. The M69 was built to exploit that environment. A hexagonal steel tube, 3 inches by 20, roughly 6 pounds. Unlike earlier thermite or magnesium mixes that could sometimes be smothered, the Napalm formulation, developed by Standard Oil with Harvard researchers, stuck and spread. E-46 amable clusters released 38 bomblets at about 2,000 feet. Each bomblet trailed a cotton streamer to orient the fuse downward. After a 3 to 5 second delay, a white phosphorus charge burst, throwing burning gel up to 100 feet in multiple directions. The timing ensured the canister lay on its side, maximizing lateral spread. Tests at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, using replica Japanese houses, had shown how quickly it could ignite entire blocks. A single B-29 carried 40 clusters, 1,120 bomblets. Of the 325 bombers dispatched, 279 reached the target. The sortie, Operation Meetinghouse, would scatter roughly 424,000 incendiary bomb bullets across Tokyo, dense enough to create a self-sustaining firestorm as individual blazes merged and generated their own winds. The mission commander, Brigadier General Thomas Sarsfield Power of the 315th Bombardment Wing, departed Guam shortly after 5:30 p.m. on March 9th. For hours, aircraft rolled at 50-second spacings off 3 islands. The round trip ran about 14 hours. Crews wore lighter clothing. Low-level temperatures made heavy suits unnecessary. With gunners, guns, and ammo largely removed, the B-29s climbed cleaner and saved fuel on the 1,500 Miramaster Passage. Mount Fuji's snowy cone served as a prominent waypoint. Sirens in Tokyo wailed around 10:30 p.m., but many residents stayed inside. Earlier high-altitude attacks had caused limited damage, and complacency lingered. The city had only 18 concrete shelters for about 90,000 people out of 4.3 million. Most households relied on bugo, shallow, board-covered trenches or simple dugouts. No match for incendiaries. Tokyo's 8,000 firefighters mostly worked with hand pumps and bucket lines. Adequate for peacetime blazes, not for the oncoming storm. Neighborhood teams were largely elderly people, women, and teenagers. At 12:08 a.m. on March 10th, Pathfinders hit the city from multiple approaches at roughly 5,000 feet, laying M47 Napalm markers that formed a vast X. Minutes later, the stream arrived. Conditions were ideal for spreading fire. Visibility was clear. Surface winds ran the 7,000 mirror with gusts to 45. Observers saw the descending clusters glitter, then the ignition points multiplied. Within minutes, thousands of fires bloomed. Gusts jumped flame across alleys and rooftops, welding separate blazes into a single conflagration. Ground temperatures soared past 800 degrees F, enough to deform glass and metal. The superheated air rose violently, pulling debris aloft and spinning vortices that shoved people off their feet. Asphalt ignited, timber frames pancaked, the roar of the fire drowned everything. Smoke cut vision to arm's length. In Sumida, 24-year-old Yoshiko Hashimoto was at home with her 13-month-old. Her husband, an army officer, was stationed across the city. Later's testimony recalled the sound of countless firebombs, like a downpour. As flames raced in, she ran with her parents' baby and sisters into alleys jammed with people trying to escape at once. Families were separated. Older residents fell behind. Volunteer brigades dropped equipment as heat forced retreat. At the Sumida River, burning debris and intensifying winds rained down. Warehouses along both banks burned. Her father pushed her and the child into the water, an act that saved them. Her mother, father, and sister, Etso, were lost. Scenes like that repeated across Shitamachi. Canals boiled near the surface. Crowds surged toward any waterway. The fire's wind plucked people from where they stood. Police stations, hospitals, and official shelters were encircled by flame. At Kikukawa Elementary School, designated as a refuge, investigators later found only metal and remains in the ash. Centuries-old temples burned with those who had fled inside. Even underground spaces filled with heat and smoke. Superheated air seared lungs in seconds. Casualty counts varied. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey recorded 87,193 dead and 40,718 injured. Tokyo Metropolitan Police listed 83,193 deaths and 40,918 wounded. The Tokyo Fire Department estimated 97,000 killed and 125,000 wounded. Historians generally accept that more than 100,000 people died that night, more immediate fatalities than either atomic strike. In total, 267,171 buildings were destroyed over 15.8 square miles, about a quarter of the city's structures. More than 1 million survivors were left without homes. Industrial loss compounded the human disaster. Over half of Tokyo's manufacturing took place in small workshops embedded in neighborhoods. Their destruction severed supply chains for essential war goods. Skilled workers died or were displaced. American losses were modest by comparison. 14 B-29s failed to return. 96 airmen were killed or missing. Several crews lost control in violent thermals. Others suffered hits from ground fire. Japanese gunners struggled to engage aircraft, flying at atypically low altitudes and in darkness. Crews reported sensing smoke at their operating height. Skeptics of Lame's approach confronted its scale and its consequences. Lame later remarked, "I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal." General Arnold sent his endorsement. "This shows your crews have the guts for anything." The operational impact was immediate. Within 10 days, Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe were struck in similar fashion. Japan's 4 largest cities hit in quick succession. The pause that followed came only because incendiary stocks were exhausted. Production of M69s was then prioritized. By spring 1945, the capability gap was at its widest. The United States could replace a B-29 within weeks. Japan couldn't rebuild neighborhoods or regenerate labor. American output exceeded Japan's by roughly 10-1. The B-29 program's $3 billion bill eclipsed Japan's entire 1945 military budget. By mid-year, the U.S. was producing around 50,000 tons of incendiaries monthly, while Japan struggled to supply basic ammunition. American methods were relentlessly empirical. The Chemical Warfare Service built full-scale Japanese blocks at Dugway, from pre-war plans to study fire spread. Standard Oil's development labs created napalm. Researchers at Harvard and the University of Chicago modeled how flames propagate in urban grids. That integration of science and operations contrasted with Japanese doctrine that leaned heavily on traditional values over material systems, an asymmetry that proved decisive. Countermeasures lagged. A February 25th attack had already destroyed 28,000 buildings, yet large firebreak projects weren't executed. Evacuation plans stayed mostly on paper. Civilians were told to remain in place even as intelligence pointed to mass incendiary raids. Inter-Urvis friction and leadership limits persisted. Night fighter performance exposed the technological gap. A few pilots, such as Lieutenant Sakio Endo, with 8 credited B-29 interceptions, found success, but they were rare. Without airborne radar, most couldn't locate targets in the smoke and dark. Acoustic cues and ground controllers became useless once the Firestorm built. Even when they closed, 20mm cannon often failed to stop a B-29 unless they hit an engine or fuel tank. Some resorted to ramming. Tokyo's firefighting capacity reflected broader infrastructure problems. The city fielded 286 engines, many of them manual pumpers. Water pressure was inadequate, and distribution lines failed under heat and blast. Doctrine focused on protecting single structures, irrelevant when thousands of ignition points erupted simultaneously. Once the conflagration formed, most companies were forced to abandon positions as equipment burned. Psychological aftershocks spread quickly. Survivors described the collapse of trusted protections. Refugees carried their stories nationwide, contradicting optimistic official reports. Factory attendance slumped. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had endured major incendiary attacks. Much of urban Japan was in ruins before the atomic bombings. Meetinghouse influenced planning for Operation Downfall, the proposed invasion. Forecasts suggested continued firebombing could erase remaining industrial capacity by October. Lame believed bombing might force capitulation by itself. Joint Chiefs estimates put conventional bombing, civilian casualties around 900,000 already, with millions more projected if the war continued. Those calculations shaped President Truman's view of atomic weapons, not as a replacement for conventional raids, but as a psychological lever to end the war. The human burden crossed enemy lines. American crews wrestled with what they witnessed. Some sought transfers. Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group remembered seeing the city burning from altitude, a picture that never faded. Japanese survivors bore physical injuries and grief that lasted lifetimes. Families on both sides were altered for generations, and social services were overwhelmed by orphans and widows. At first light on March 10th, the eastern map of Tokyo had been redrawn. Concrete shells and brick stubs stood where districts once lived. Landmarks vanished. Recovery teams needed heavy machinery. Many victims couldn't be identified. Mass funerals stretched on for weeks. Waterways clogged with debris. Industrial effects ran deeper than early estimates. The eastern wards had been dense, with family workshops producing precision instruments, electrical components, and mechanical fittings. With those nodes gone, supply chains buckled. The loss of craftsmen and machinists, skills cultivated over years, couldn't be quickly replaced. Even intact factories saw output fall as workers coped with loss, housing crises, and despair. Once stocks of incendiaries were restored, the campaign resumed in May with tighter technique and higher efficiency. By July, B-29s dropped warning leaflets before attacks, naming the next targets, psychological warfare underscoring absolute air control. Resistance dwindled as veteran pilots were lost. Ammunition ran low, and civil defense collapsed. Legal debates continue. The 1907 HEG Convention touched on bombardment of undefended places, but what counts as defended and what counts as a military target remained contested. Post-war courts prosecuted some leaders for civilian targeting, yet did not try Allied air campaigns. Military necessity, as a rationale for area effects, influenced later humanitarian law, even as precision tools improved. Weather science multiplied the damage. The March 9-10 strike was scheduled for strong winds after a dry period. Forecasts pegged surface speeds between 17 and 45 knots depending on neighborhood, and planners integrated those analyses into timing and approach. Crews experienced the mission in ways no plan could capture: smoke reaching altitude, violent thermals, and the sight of a city aflame. Some could not square the objective with what they saw. Others focused on ending the conflict swiftly. Japanese command and control faltered. AA fired continuously with limited effect. Fighters flew 90 sorties with scattered results. Fire service leaders lacked early warning on scale. Military protection prioritized government and military sites while neighborhoods burned. Communications died as lines and roads failed. Memory work was slow. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki's global recognition, Tokyo's firebombing remained less known abroad. Survivors worked for decades to document it. Katsumoto Saotoi, himself a survivor, founded the Center of the Tokyo Raids and War Damage, preserving testimony that might have disappeared. Strategists still study Meetinghouse for what it teaches about air power's reach and limits. It proved city killing doesn't guarantee immediate surrender. Japan fought on 5 more months. It showed technology can leap geography, but also how modern war entangles civilians and industry. The drift from daylight precision to nighttime area burning was an operational evolution more than a formal policy switch. By March 1945, urban density and dispersed production, not discrete factories, drove target lists. Trauma persisted for decades. Many children never learned their family's fate. Yoshiko Hashimoto's memory endures. Parents and sister gone, mother and baby alive by a split-second choice. Working-class Tokyo's social architecture, extended families, shops, neighborhood committees, was cut away in a single night. As for ending the war, scholars debate whether bombing alone would have compelled surrender, but the raids clearly hastened collapse. Systematic urban destruction tightened constraints on continued resistance. Emperor Hirohito later cited the bombing and the internal situation when weighing surrender. The roughly 100,000 who died in Tokyo factored into decisions aimed at avoiding an invasion that could have killed millions, an arithmetic that offers little solace but mattered to strategy. Totals don't capture the whole story, but they set the scale. 325 B-29s launched, 279 reached the target, 1,665 tons of incendiaries delivered, 15.88 square miles burned, 267,171 buildings destroyed, about 100,000 dead, roughly 1 million displaced. Operation Meetinghouse remains the deadliest air raid ever carried out. Not a victory to celebrate, but a stark warning about what happens when industrial science, strategy, and fire meet in a city built of wood.